Hi, I'm Casey Gwinn, President of the National Family Justice Center Alliance. Thank you for watching the 15-minute version of Telling Amy's Story. We hope it's been a challenge to you, and we hope it's brought information to your attention about domestic violence. Over the last 27 years that I've been working in this field, we've learned a lot about domestic violence and about situations in which women end up in incredibly grave danger. Amy Homan McGee was in grave danger. She was in a situation that we would call high risk. As we're showing this video all over America with the support of Penn State and the Verizon Foundation, we're challenging communities to show this to business leaders, to professionals in the field, to members of the community, to really gain a better understanding of domestic violence and be able to know what to do about it. After watching this 15-minute video, we hope that you'll take some time to talk with others, to dialogue, and to really come to an understanding of what you personally should be doing when you're in a situation where you're working with someone who's a victim of domestic violence, particularly someone who's in grave danger. The first thing that we challenge people to think about when they're working with a friend or a family member who's a victim of domestic violence is what to say. What do you say to them? It's a very difficult situation. Women often get involved in an abusive situation and they don't want to leave. There are complex reasons for that. It's difficult for people to talk to them about it. And we often challenge people to think about some of those things that are best to say to someone in this situation. In our first book, Gail Strack and I talked about this issue a number of years ago, and we basically identified 5 things that we would encourage you to say to someone who's a victim of domestic violence, a coworker, a friend, a family member. The first is, "I'm afraid for your safety." A simple, straightforward statement that says, "I really care about you, and I think you're in a dangerous situation because of what's happening in your relationship or what's happening at home." The second statement is to say, "I'm afraid for the safety of your children." A lot of the research tells us that if a victim of domestic violence has children, that they're more likely to leave the situation because of their children. When they realize the impact on their children, when they realize their children are in danger, a victim of domestic violence is more likely to leave a domestic violence situation. So saying "I'm afraid for the safety of your children" may well be an encouragement to her that it's time to leave or it's time to get help. The third thing that we recommend saying is, "It will only get worse." It's very clear that when a man crosses that line and starts using physical violence with his partner, he doesn't generally stop without intervention, criminal justice system intervention, civil justice system intervention, a faith community or business community intervention, but he generally doesn't go back after he's crossed that line into violence and abuse. So saying it will only get worse is really an encouragement to a victim to realize that she needs help, that his apologies and his "I'm sorry, I promise I'll never do this again" doesn't really mean anything, because once he's crossed that line, he will do it again, and it doesn't matter how many times he apologizes or how many times he says he's sorry. So those first 3 statements, important to remember. I'm afraid for your safety. I'm afraid for the safety of your children. It will only get worse. And then the fourth statement that we recommend saying to victims of domestic violence is, there's help available, and there is help available. Today in the United States of America, there's as much help available as has ever been there for victims and their children. And letting her know that that help is available through a local domestic violence organization, through a local family justice center, through police agencies, through a prosecutor's office, there is help available. So letting her know that and affirming to her that that help is in fact out there is very important. Victims feel isolated, and they've come to believe that no one's going to help them and that no one is ever going to stop the abuser. And so that statement, "there's help available," needs to be firm and clear. And then finally, the last, or the fifth statement, if you will, is "I'm there for you no matter what." And that statement's an important one, So often victims of domestic violence feel judged, and they feel people are looking down upon them and saying, why doesn't she just leave? What's the matter with her? Why doesn't she protect her kids? And she may not get out when you've talked to her. She may not get out even after you know some things and after you've said there's help available. She may go back. She may not be willing to talk to you even that day about what it is that you're trying to talk about. So making that statement, I'm here for you no matter what, is that pledge that you'll be there tomorrow or the next day or a week later or whenever it is that she's willing to come back and talk to you again or to seek help. Maybe more violence will have happened. Maybe something else will have happened. Maybe she'll start to realize the impact on her children. But being available and committing to be available is an important piece to really being a friend to someone who is a victim of domestic violence. Then the other thing that we'd like you to think about and be aware of as you're watching this video and as you're discussing telling Amy's story is this was a high-risk domestic violence case. We have a lot of research now in the United States that's caused many of us to come to the conclusion that most domestic violence homicides are predictable. And if a domestic violence homicide is predictable, then it's preventable. It's only a question of resources and priorities. Too often we see a situation like this one in State College, Pennsylvania, where a woman is in extreme danger, a lot of bad things are happening, her abuser is taking all kinds of actions that are moving her closer and closer and closer to dying, and nobody's sharing the information, nobody's paying attention. Then she dies, he kills her, and everybody says, oh, there's nothing we could have done. Isn't it a shame? The research tells us there are things we can do, and that this information about high-risk cases is something that everyone should have at their fingertips. There are markers, there are indicators. Not every domestic violence situation ends up in a homicide. Most victims of domestic violence don't die. But for those that do end up dying, when we go back and look, as they did in State College, Pennsylvania, at all the indicators and all the factors, it's always very clear what the markers were that led up to the actual homicide. So we'd encourage you to be aware of those markers so that when you're dealing with someone, it means something when they say, he strangled me. Or it means something when she says, I'm scared to death. Or it means something when she says, the violence is getting worse. So many of the factors that now tell us that someone is in serious danger of being killed in a domestic violence situation were present in Amy Homan McGee's situation. It's just that the information didn't get acted upon in a way that kept her alive, in a way that saved her life. So those factors are all very clear now. A history of domestic violence is relevant, that this isn't the first time it's happened, that there's a prior history. The fact that strangulation occurred is a very important factor. The fact that the violence may be increasing in severity and strangulation, actually choking your partner, which Amy was choked by Vincent. Choking may in fact end up being one of those things that ultimately leads to the homicide. But a lot of the research now tells us that if he strangled her once and she survives, he's 800% more likely to kill her later in the relationship. So when she was telling people he choked me, that really needed to be something that people were paying attention to. He also threatened to kill her. He also threatened to kill the kids. He had a history of substance abuse. All of those things were relevant. You heard in the video, he had stalking behaviors. He not only was trying to figure out where she was and what she was doing, but he actually came to her workplace. Those factors all tell us this was a high-risk case. And most significantly, perhaps among all those factors, was she had tried to separate from him, and in fact, she had told him near her death they were done and that he needed to move out. Separation, when a victim tries to get away, she's in more danger than she's ever been. So you had all these things. You had death threats, you had strangulation, you had history of violence, you had access to weapons, you had drugs and alcohol. You had all the factors that we know from the research tell us that somebody was in grave danger. And yet people were hearing these things and it didn't mean anything to them. We're past the day in the United States of America where it's only the responsibility of law enforcement professionals to do something about domestic violence. It is all of our responsibilities. We all are responsible for doing things when we have information, when we know that somebody's in this situation. So I challenge you, you've watched this video now, Get more educated. Find out what your local resources are. Do the things you need to do to know what to say to a victim of domestic violence when you interact with somebody who's in this situation. And if you start hearing the factors that equal a high-risk case, bells should be going off in your head. Not only should you be indicating and talking to the victim about those high-risk factors and the fact that that means that he's very likely to kill her or that he may kill her, but you then need to be making sure that you are getting the professionals involved. It is not the responsibility of a private citizen to intervene with a batterer or to get involved in being the intervention professional in a very dangerous high-risk situation, because it's not uncommon for the batterer then to turn on you if you try to play that role. But getting the victim connected to professionals once you know all those things and communicating to her how serious the situation is and how possible it is that he may in fact kill her is exactly what we need to be doing as community members, as business leaders, as faith leaders, now that we have the information. The great tragedy of telling Amy's story and this entire documentary is we can't change the ending for Amy Homan McGee. She's dead. Her kids lost their mother and they'll never get her back. But we can change the ending for other victims of domestic violence. We can get educated, we can learn this information, and we can do something about it with the next Amy Homan McGee that we meet. Thank you for watching this video. We encourage you to get involved in this work, find out your local resources, understand these issues, talk to your kids about these issues, talk to your coworkers about these issues. And then as a situation prevents itself, as you start finding out about someone in your family, a friend, a coworker that's in this situation, talk, ask questions, take some action, show you care. If you do those things, you can change the ending for someone else. Thank you.